What many founders underestimate is that you're not just doing business in one market, but it's actually 50 different states, and all the states have its own rules and regulations.
I think it will come as no surprise that the misalignment is usually timing. But usually companies come to us with a particular start date in mind. They want someone in the US immediately. The issue is that that particular employee may not be eligible for any visa category. It doesn't come down to if you're paid or not. It really has to do with if you're doing productive work. If you're an engineer, you could come and get information about the software you'll be building, but you need to leave before you actually build it, unless you have a work visa. A very real consequence is, for example, if you overstay for less than a year, when you leave, it triggers a 3-year ban. If you overstay for more than a year, it triggers a 10-year ban.
Expanding to the United States is exciting. On paper, it looks manageable. Open an entity, hire new people, start building your presence. Many founders quickly realize that the real complexity shows up much sooner than expected. Visas may take time, payroll and tax compliances are not that straightforward. Healthcare and employment rules work very differently to those known from Europe. I'm Lucas Lazewski, and this is Dev is in the Details podcast. It's about leadership and execution in the real world. If you're a founder or a member of a leadership team considering U.S. expansion, today's conversation is for you. Joining me today are Khensani Mathebula from Devine Immigration, a U.S. immigration attorney advising companies on visa strategy and legal risks, and Bergshoeff from TAPS Inc., supporting international businesses with payroll, tax compliance, HR, benefits, and hiring in the U.S. Together, we will discuss what founders tend to underestimate, where expansions plan often go wrong, and how to approach the U.S. market with greater clarity and fewer surprises. Ladies, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. So, U.S. expansion often looks simple from the outside. Why does it become complex almost immediately once companies start executing?
I think one of the things that we notice with companies is that the US is, of course, a market with a lot of opportunity, but it's indeed also definitely, or it can be, a complex market. And I think what many founders underestimate is that you're not just doing business in one market, but it's actually 50 different states, and all the states have its own rules and regulations, and many things work very different per state. So that's something, if you're starting out, that you really have to understand and that you have to navigate, which is also why I think, especially in the beginning, it's very important to work with people that have the local knowledge and know exactly where you have to register and what you have to do in every state.
And on the U.S. immigration side, U.S. expansion becomes complex quickly because U.S. immigration is neither intuitive nor fast. Founders often assume they can relocate themselves or key hire swiftly, but visa categories have strict eligibility rules and fixed and often slow timelines. And since federal agencies don't adjust for business needs, immigration becomes an early gatekeeper. And without advanced planning, it can easily disrupt a business's expansion plans.
Fantastic. You've already answered my next question. What is the biggest underestimate beyond product and technology for the U.S. market and entering U.S. market? So let's talk about the immigration reality, Khensani. This is really interesting. When companies start planning the expansion, usually this is a secondary step, or it's something that we will think about later. Why is that a risk, or where should that, right course of action for that should be?
Yeah, so what I'll start with is founders often underestimate one very basic reality, which is you cannot simply come to the U.S. and start working. Before a founder or an employee is scheduled to begin work in the United States, the critical question must be, can this person legally work in the U.S. when we need them to, right? And I should also start with the fact that traveling on ESTA or on a B1, B2 visa does not give an individual work authorization. It allows you to do very limited business activities, such as attending meetings or conferences, but not to do any productive work. Also, treating immigration as an afterthought is risky because it can directly slow down or even block execution. Founders often think of everything else first: market entry, fundraising, hiring, before asking the simple and critical question, as I said, can this person legally work in the U.S. when we need them to? And so U.S. immigration timelines are outside the company's control, from visa processing to consular appointments. And if immigration only becomes a consideration after job offers are made or launch dates are set or flights are booked, companies risk delays, lost opportunities, and significant financial impact.
That sounds like a lot. And is there like a list of what's allowed and what's not? Like, for example, if I have a business in Europe and I come around to US to install software for one of my clients on their servers or something, or support them locally, and the intent is to stay there for a couple of weeks, perform an installation, look after it in production, how it runs, and maybe adjust and fix errors, and then fly back. Does that still require complex visa procedure or a different approach?
Yes. It's interesting because your question brings up a specific B1, B2 visa that it is an exception for installing equipment. But I think your broader question is, if you come in for just a few weeks and you want to do some work, do you need a work visa? And the answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. You definitely need one.
And what are the most common routes for obtaining visa for founders when they expand to US?
Sure, I'll go over the most common work visas for founders. The first would be the E2 Treaty Investor Visa. It's for founders from treaty countries who have invested in the US and are going to direct a US business. It's a great option, but it is limited by nationality. Then there is the O1 Intercompany Transfer, and this is for moving executives, managers, and employees with specialized knowledge who have worked for a foreign entity for at least 1 year. And so you can transfer an employee to the US to work for the US entity, but again, it requires that person to have worked for the company abroad for 1 year. Then there is the O1 visa. This is for individuals with extraordinary ability. It can apply to business, tech, and science. It requires the individual to have quite a lot of clout, such as awards and press, often used for high-achieving founders and key hires. And then there is the H-1B visa, but this is less common for founders for a number of reasons. There are annual caps for the H-1B visa, which is why there's a lottery process. And this year, there will be a $100,000 application fee for beneficiaries outside of the US. So for many reasons, this is not a go-to option for founders.
When you say investment, the visa for investment, how does that work exactly? Is there an amount of money that is expected to be paid to the business or some other, real estate market or something?
For the E2 visa, there isn't a specific amount. In practice, we find that there is a high risk of denial if at least $100,000 or approximately $100,000 isn't spent. But in terms of spending money, it must be, I think the critical piece there is it must be spent. You can't be planning to invest. You must have already invested the money in startup costs. So that can be things like equipment, marketing, rent, if you pay for rent up front for a year. But generally speaking, ongoing costs like salaries would not qualify.
I understand. So when someone has an idea and starts off, immediately realizing that they should be in US market instead, maybe even for sole reason of raising capital, what's the timing and chicken egg problem before not having the money and willing to come to US with a great idea and being open for investment versus, I need to get the seed round in here somehow to get that 100K or 200K before I can move over? Do you think there is some correlation, or do people come over on ESTA first to talk to investors, and then they receive founding and they start the Delaware company and then continue with their journey? What's your experience?
Yeah, so usually individuals will come to the US on ESTA or on a B1, B2 visa. And as I said, that's fine for meetings. So when it comes to negotiating and fundraising, that's fine. The critical piece is when the individual needs to start working for the company, And so at that stage, you need to have a work visa before your first day of work. And the processing times are typically very long. And I'll just give you examples for the common visa types so you have an idea. But currently, so for the E2 Treaty Investor Visa, which is processed at US embassies, we're seeing that it takes approximately 90 business days, which is roughly 5 months, just to register the company as an investor visa before you can then go ahead and apply for the actual visa for each applicant. For the L1 intercompany transferee visa, exactly. The current processing time is around 6 months. For the O1 visa, the current processing time is around 9.5 months. So you see, it isn't startup speed. And then for the H-1B visa, since it's lottery-based, the lottery happens in March of each year. This year, it will take place on March 4th to March 19th. And then only if the registration is selected can the employee actually file the petition for a work start date of October 1st. So it's not a matter of, an individual being able to start work in a few weeks. However, and I should highlight that there is premium processing. So for an additional fee of currently $2,805, but it will increase to $2,965 in March, USCIS would adjudicate a petition in 15 business days. But they can also issue a request for evidence. So that is when they want more evidence before concluding their adjudication, which would delay the process. You then need to allow time to respond to the RFE, and then the 15-day restarts. So I would say, realistically, you're looking at 3 to 4 months if you pay for premium processing, which again isn't quick.
Wow. And it's all the same no matter where we fly from in Europe, right? Or is there a chance that, I don't know, British citizens get some different treatment than, I don't know, Spaniards? Is that a thing or?
Well, ESTA allows certain countries to travel to the US without a visa. So that is special treatment that you don't have to apply for B1, B2 tourist visa. But when it comes to the actual work visas, no, there isn't any special treatment. You are subject to the standard processing times unless you pay for premium processing, which, as I said, still takes a few months.
Got it. So what else should funder think about before hiring in US or relocating someone in US? Because there could be a benefit to actually go with local hire, right? Simply because of the amount of effort that it takes to move someone there.
I would say 3 key questions for founders to ask would be, firstly, what visa category realistically fits for the role and for the individual? So it really is a case-by-case basis. The second one is, does the company's corporate structure support that visa? And lastly, what is the actual timeline to secure the visa? So I think those are critical questions to ask, and companies should seek out U.S. immigration advice as soon as possible, because early planning ensures that they'll be able to pursue the most appropriate visa strategy and would allow sufficient time before the intended hire or relocation.
So if the leadership decides they want to go ahead with this, what kind of support they can expect on the market or from companies like what you do, right, with your services, versus what they can do internally with their own operations team?
So here at Laura Devine Immigration, we specialize in both US and UK immigration. And so we assist with the full process from filing the petition to actually doing the visa application. So we assist from, I would say, when you even have the thought that you want to start work in the US, so you want someone to start work in the US, that would be the time for you to reach out to us so that we can get more information about what the role is, what the individual's qualifications are, what visa would be the most appropriate. And then we would assist with the full process. And, you absolutely could do it yourself, but US immigration is quite complicated. Right. And making a mistake would delay an already long process. So for those reasons, I would say getting U.S. immigration advice is definitely recommended.
And now switching to operational reality, to you, Flor. Once immigration is in motion, founders often assume that the rest is administrative, right? What does the reality look like? Why is it different?
I definitely think that immigration is indeed a huge part of it. Like Khensani was also saying, we get that a lot, that companies underestimate the timelines and that they're coming to us and that they have an employee that they want to send over and they expect that the employee can start within 2 months, but they don't have anything set up yet. So yeah, that's often when we have to kind of do some expectation management. Like it can take very long for a visa. And before you can even apply, you need to set up your structure. So I think immigration has a huge impact on the timeline, because if you're not applying for a visa, it's very easy to set up in the US. It only takes a couple of days to set up an entity. Tax ID, we can apply for it within a day. Bank account only takes 3 weeks. So in general, setting up a business in the US is quite fast. Yeah, definitely what we notice when we do this for companies is that they find the banking system quite outdated. In the US, they still work a lot with checks. And it kind of feels like with banking in the US, you go back 10 years in time. So that's a comment that we often get during the setup. But yeah, it is quite easy to set up a business in the US.
And have you met examples where someone would set up a business in US and continue their operations from Europe, just keep the business operational in US for sales purposes, and maybe even to pay people in Europe through it? Is that something easy to do?
Yeah, we see that a lot. But yeah, what we often recommend is that if you set up a US entity, that you use that entity for the business that you have in US, because that US entity, at least then you have all the risk in the US entity. You protect your European entity from having and creating any exposure in US. And that's also kind of a common mistake that we see companies make, is that they wait very long with setting up a US entity and they keep doing business with the European entity, because they feel like if they do business with the European entity, they don't have any tax obligations, or they don't need to register in a state, or they don't have to file any taxes since they don't have a US entity. But you create the same kind of exposure with your US entity versus your European entity. So yeah, we really recommend to really stay on top of, okay, what are your sales per state? What are your activities? Are you creating nexus anywhere? Do I need to register or file taxes anywhere? And if so, maybe it's time to set up the US entity and do so from a US entity.
Got it.
And that's also very important. For example, if you're going to hire employees in the US, there we also always say do that via your US entity. Don't become an employer with your foreign entity in the US, because employment liability is now a huge thing. And you definitely don't want to take that risk with your foreign entity that has all your assets.
Help me understand, because in Europe, we can have like a full-time employment, or we can have a freelance employment, right? And then in one case, employer takes care of all the, social welfare and health insurance. And in other case, the employee is taking care of that themselves. Does that model transfer to US as well? The expectation of local workforce to have one or the other, or choose between them?
Yeah, that's kind of similar, because in the US, you can also indeed have the employee, or you can work with independent contractors. And then it's either on a W-2 for employment and 1099 for independent contractors. But in many European countries, they're becoming more strict when working with independent contractors, that you need to make sure that it cannot be seen as an employer-employee relationship. And the same is happening in the US. So yeah, more and more states are becoming more strict when it comes to that. And that you really need to be able to show that it is a freelancer and not actually an employee.
Oh yeah, that's an ongoing discussion here in Europe as well, with a lot of countries and geographies. It sounded like there's a lot of complexity there. Like I can step on a landmine, right? Called like, oh, I'm liable in Texas, or I'm liable in New York. How do you help someone navigate this? Like what's the, how would I even know, or what kind of questions I could ask to you to find out that I have this kind of exposure?
I think it's very important to work with local experts and know exactly what you need to do in every state. Because we often have conversations with companies and then really go over the business that they have in each state. So if they have a physical presence in a state by warehousing, having an office or employees, it means that you have to register for foreign authority in that state. But it can also be that you don't have a physical presence, that you're doing sales in different states, and then your sales exceed a certain threshold, meaning you need to register for sales tax in a state. Or indeed, if you're going to hire in different states, then you need to register as an employer in that state and get tax ID numbers, set up workers' compensation. So yeah, I think it's important to really work with advisors there that can help you set up correctly. And then once you're set up, I think it's easier from there to maintain. So especially in the beginning, I would say there are more conversations that need to happen. Also for benefits, if you're going to hire, benefits work very differently in the US. So you need to understand, okay, what is available? What can I offer? What do I want to offer? How does that work? But then once it's set up, it's easier to add additional employees to the existing benefit package.
Can you speak a bit more about the benefits? Like if when it comes to hiring, how much of the current knowledge of a founder in Europe can be transferred directly to the US for building their team over there?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would definitely say, I think it's better to kind of start from scratch and really see it as a new market, because what we often see is that when companies want to hire in the US, that they really focus on the recruitment process and finding the right candidate. And then they found a candidate that they want to make an offer to. And then they come to us and they're like, oh, we need your help. We need to create a job offer. But it's very hard in one day to go over that whole benefit process and know what a company can offer. You really need a few weeks to prepare for that. And then we've seen it with companies that they had a great candidate, but then they're not able to make an offer quickly. And then they lose the candidate because they went with another offer. And that's such a shame. So I always tell companies, like, please already start a couple of weeks in advance with having these conversations so that you know this is what we can offer. This is what we want to offer. If there are any gaps, like how can we fix that? I think still, we see it too often that companies think that they can just copy and paste exactly what they have in Europe to the US. And that just, it's very difficult and it doesn't really work like that. Also for example, vacation, sick leave, it's different per state what you can offer. So in many of these conversations, also the first question is, okay, where are you planning to hire? In which states?
Wow, I'm surprised that it's so different state by state. You know, from Europe, I look at the US as a single unified market, but it seems like each state has its own, ways of doing things, right? Including labor law. Is that the thing? Like each state has its own labor law, or is it at the federal level?
No, that's indeed per state. And that's also why, for example, a job offer is created based off the state where you're going to hire. So it's either a New York job offer or Florida job offer.
Oh, no matter where the company is. Fascinating. When you talk about benefits, what kind of, like in Europe, we have a base salary. For some roles, we would have commission, and there's social welfare, health insurance. Is there anything else? Like, is there some extras or perks that we don't think of in Europe that you would have to provide to employees in the US?
So what we see is that health benefits, being able to offer health insurance, that's definitely the benefit that's most important to many candidates. But it's also something that's not always easy to offer, especially if you're a company that's just starting out. So small organizations, and you're a small organization, if you have less than 50 people, then it's not mandatory to offer health benefits. But in many cases, it would be a deal breaker for the candidate if you don't offer it. But you cannot offer it to just the first employee. You need to have at least 2 participating employees. So before you promise anything to the candidate or that you add anything to an email, it's very important to check first if it's possible to set up a health benefits plan. We definitely see with our clients that the cost can definitely be shocking. Also, the cost of health insurance, it depends on the state where either the company is based or the majority of the employees are based. But it can be around $1,000 per person per month. It's typically more expensive in New York or California. But what we also see is because a lot of the clients that are hiring, of course, they don't have a huge reputation yet in the US. They're a newly starting company in the US. So you really have to promote yourself to the company, and you have to show what maybe any other perks are that you can offer. we see that a lot of candidates find it really exciting to work for example, a London-based company, and that as part of the package, they have to be in London once every 6 weeks. They have to go there for 2 months for training in the beginning, and they find it exciting to work in such an international environment. We also see many of our clients, well, as you probably know, in Europe, we tend to have more vacation days compared to the US. So we typically see that a lot of our European clients offer a bit more vacation days to the US employees to kind of make up for maybe the healthcare benefits package to be less good. So I think you need to look at your overall offer to the candidate and make sure that that's as attractive as possible.
Thank you for sharing this. I was very curious about the costs, because in Europe, when we hire, we can easily assume 20-25% on top for all the additional social welfare and health benefits. And they're usually defined by local government, by the local country government, which is not like we can choose from private providers most of the time. But over there, it's a choice, right? We can offer specific dental care and include or exclude family members, right? For various employees. So it's like you can compose a competitive package.
Yeah, and in general, the employer cost in the US is less compared to Europe. But yeah, the healthcare benefits and salaries are way higher. So in the end, you still tend to pay more for talent. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. Is there anything in compliance area that we should be aware of? Like I know we have GDPR. Now a lot of US states are introducing some similar legislation. But would there be any other surprises in the term of like, I move my operations there tomorrow. Let's say we have our visas properly structured, or we hire over there locally. Is there any other way that we would need to get first sorted before we can accept payments, for example, assuming we have a bank account already?
I think it's very important to look at the right structure setup. And yeah, as I said, setting up a business, it's definitely not difficult, but you need to do it right. And we also notice that we talk to a lot of companies that start with Google and then they Google entity types US or best entity structure US. And then they often end up going for an LLC. But most of those articles, they're really written for American founders that set up a business in the US. And that's very different from international founders that come over to the US and set up a business there. So yeah, I think it's very important to make sure that you set up the right structure, and in order to protect you from a tax perspective, but also a liability perspective, to really protect the foreign parent that you have.
And can this be fixed later if I have LLC and I want to move it to be a Inc. or vice versa?
Yeah, it can be fixed later. So what we do a lot is that, because you can, if you set up an LLC, you call it a check the box to have it classified as a corporation for tax purposes. So that's something that we do a lot for companies. Yeah.
So it isn't really much of a hassle, I expect, for when it comes to potential taxation, right? Because I would presume that the difference is mainly who and how is liable to taxation, right? Either in US or in Europe or both at the same time, depending on treaties, I guess.
Yeah, because for many Americans, they prefer an LLC because then you avoid double taxation. An LLC is transparent for tax purposes. But for many European founders, it can be better to set up a C corporation. A C corporation is responsible for its own tax filing, and thereby you protect your foreign entity better. You keep the foreign entity out of the US, and the US entity is the entity that does the tax filing in the US. And then you're right that you don't have double taxation, because many countries have the tax treaty with the US. So you either pay your taxes in the US or in Europe. So the typical setup for a European company setting up subsidiary in the US is indeed setting up a Delaware C corporation. There can be differences to this scenario. So for example, if you work with local partners, then you often set up a joint venture LLC, or if you're going to have a physical location or certain projects, you may set up different LLCs per project. But yeah, the general setup is a Delaware C Corp.
Thank you for this. Let's switch to where things spring apart, all right? Now those are questions to both of you. Please feel free to jump in, Khensani, at any point. What are the most often misalignments, most frequent misalignments between immigration, HR, and business in the timelines? Let's start with that.
On our side, I think it will come as no surprise that the misalignment is usually timing. That usually companies come to us with a particular start date in mind. They want someone in the US immediately to hit a launch milestone or close a deal. And they've already issued an offer, for example. And so as a result, well, I would say the issue is that that particular employee may not be eligible for any visa category. That's a possibility. And then if they are, the processing time is generally so long that the start date they have in mind is simply not possible. But of course, we do everything that we can to move things along as quickly as possible.
I definitely agree with that. I think it's really indeed the timeline. So either a company comes to us and they want to send someone over on a visa and the person needs to start soon, where timeline is an issue. But we also have it a lot with just hiring U.S. employees in the U.S. that they come to us and they let us know that also in many cases the person already started a week ago. And then the payroll isn't set up yet. The registrations haven't been done. So then we need to act very quickly. And we are able to do that. So, I mean, we can definitely fix that and then maybe start with an advance payment for the first payroll and then just set it up as soon as possible. But of course, yeah, ideally, it would be great to at least have 3 weeks to set everything up from the start.
So on that last one, does it mean like you act yourselves as an employee of record of some sort, or you do it with checks in advance on the behalf of the organization from Europe that just launches in US?
We can act as an employer of record. So that's definitely a possibility and also something that we sometimes do if a company needs to have a US employee, but they don't necessarily need to already have the US entity. But if we need to set up the payroll in a rush and the company doesn't have a bank account yet, then they can also, as an exception, wire the money. And then once a bank account is set up, the bank account will be added to the payroll software. And then from then it will be automatically withdrawn from the bank account.
Mm-hmm. How about the case that just crossed my mind? So there's a technical individual, very skilled, with AI skills and everything, and he's out of Central Europe. And there is an American business-oriented person. They join forces and they start the business together. Now, the entity is in Delaware, and out of Delaware it can pay to Europe. I guess it does that. But then for demonstrations or installations or everything, when they join forces, flying over to New York, that individual from Europe to New York to run presentations. I guess that's just meetings, right? Khensani, so they can do that on just ESTA. But where does it become like a risk?
Well, okay. So for U.S. immigration, there may be a couple of options for this person, assuming that they want to work in the U.S., right? And it may not be full-time, as long as it goes beyond just meetings, right? As soon as they do anything that they would ordinarily be paid for, they should have a work visa. So if they are an executive or a manager or an individual with specialized knowledge, we'd be looking at the L1 transferee visa, provided they've been working abroad for the same company. So we'd be looking at transferring them on an L1. So that's a 3-year visa initially that can be extended up to 7 years for managers and executives, up to 5 years for individuals with specialized knowledge. Mm-hmm. If the company, and I did want to highlight the E2 investor visa option, especially for European countries, it is an incredible route. It requires that the company is majority owned by treaty nationals. So E2 visas are based on treaties that the U.S. has with particular countries. So in your scenario, if the individual from the European country actually owns the majority of the shares, so it just needs to be majority owned by treaty nationals. That means that once the company is registered as an investor company, and that involves making the investment and can take approximately 5 months through the embassy before we can apply for visa. It's a process, but it's great because, for example, UK nationals get 5-year visas, and also these visas are renewable indefinitely. Unlike other visa types where there's a maximum number of years that you can extend the visas up until, versus with the E2, as I said, 5-year visas for the UK, renewable indefinitely. They're issued in different lands for different countries. Also, the benefit of that is you can then send other employees, as the company grows, you can then send other employees over on an E2 visa as long as they have the same nationality. And at that point, once the company is already registered, it's actually quite quick. So this is kind of the exception you were hoping for European countries.
Yes.
If the company has been registered as an investor company, then it really is just about interview availability at the embassy, because each applicant can just submit their application at their interview. So that takes just a few weeks. But as I said, on the front end, it takes about 5 months for processing, and that doesn't include actually spending the money and us preparing the application, where we have to show the money has been spent with evidence like receipts and bank statements. We have to provide a business plan with financial projections and hiring projections. But once you've done all of that on the front end, then it is actually quite a great pipeline to send employees quite swiftly to the US. I know I kind of expanded on your hypothetical, but I hope that was helpful.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Sure.
That's very cool. And this applies even to hackathons, right? Because I wonder if hackathon is considered work or not. If someone flies over for, Friday night to New York, participates in a hackathon on Saturday and flies back on Sunday evening.
No, I think, a hackathon, so I assume they wouldn't be paid. It's more of kind of a conference, I think. It would
I see. So
be aligned.
Okay. So that's the caveats.
I may need to check for you. I guess
no, it's fine.
It's just what the hackathon involves. If you're a judge and you'll be paid, you need a work visa, right? So it depends on how you'll be participating.
So let me try to hack this. So you're saying if I do this pro bono or anything, that's fine.
And no, that's not what I'm saying. It doesn't come down to. It doesn't come down to if you're paid or not. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a gray area. It really has to do with if you're doing productive work. We always advise people to be quite conservative. Like anything that would be considered work in their industry, go ahead and get the work visa first.
Yeah, of course.
Here's a nice example, I think. So for seamstress, for example, they could come to the US. They could do measurements, but then if they wanted to actually sew, they need a work visa. If they're going to do that here, they should leave and do the work elsewhere. If you're an engineer, you could come and get information about the software you'll be building, but you need to leave before you actually build it, unless you have a work visa.
That's a very concrete example.
Is that helpful?
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
Yes, fantastic. That's fantastic, because you see what I tend to happen a lot is young engineers would work for free, simply fueled by their passion, and then the reward comes in equity later, right? I mean, by later, I mean like 3 to 6 months down the line when they launch the product, right? And the question is then, what is work? But you just confirmed for me that this isn't working like that. What would be the most common real-world mistake you see repeatedly among your, customers or past customers, or what people come to you with, like anonymously, of course?
I think one thing that we're seeing a lot is, and I already discussed it a little bit, but people indeed do business for too long with their foreign entity. So, we often have companies that are already. We had one company, for example, a very practical example. They were already doing over 12 million in sales in the US, but they didn't register anywhere. They didn't file any sales tax. And then in the end, we had to help them with a voluntary disclosure project to go back to all these states and still, do all your sales tax filings. And that's what we see happen more often, that companies don't realize that they have created a sales tax exposure even with their foreign entity. So, and that's also something that we can, for example, help with, to do a check and a review based on your sales per state to determine do you already have any sales tax exposure? And is there anything that you need to do in a certain state?
Oh, brilliant. But just a quick follow-up question. Does it apply to B2B or B2C only, the sales tax, exposure in the US?
Well, it depends on if you sell to the end customer. So it only applies in the last part of the supply chain. If you sell to a individual or a company that's using your product, then sales tax is applicable. If they resell it, then they are responsible for the sales tax. But in general, sales tax is very complicated in the US. It's very different from VAT, and there are many exceptions and many differences also when it comes to software, for example. In many states, SaaS is seen as a product and is sales taxable. But if it's customizable software, then in many cases it's not sales taxable. So yeah, also definitely there, it's something that you really have to check based on your business model and the states where you're selling to.
Wow, that's probably one of the biggest surprises over this entire recording for me, how complicated that bit is. Because I thought it's like, okay, B2C, you pay where your customers are. B2B, you don't pay because it's the reverse tax, which I thought works everywhere the same, but really not.
Yeah, and also another example is sales tax is based on the zip code. So there are over 13,000 different sales tax percentages. So yeah, no, it's definitely
no way.
A different beast. Yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought we had to complicate it in Europe with some exempts, different rate for food, warm food and cold food have different VAT rates. And I thought this was ridiculous. Well, okay. No, but they're grouped somehow, right? I mean, it can be that there's or the rates are the same, basically.
The rates are different per zip code, but also here, I definitely want to say that it's mostly, you need to make sure that you set it up correctly. But then once you're set up, it's so much easier to maintain. And there are also a lot of different softwares like an Avalara or a TextJar that then based on the checkout calculate the right sales tax percentage. So there are definitely tools that can help you to manage this efficiently.
Mm-hmm. And to send it back to the corresponding zip code area or, I don't know, state tax office as well, right? Or for the sales tax, I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I could imagine this is pretty automatic these days.
Yeah.
All right. And what would that mistake be for companies in terms of immigration, Khensani?
It's less a specific mistake, more about, I think, the fact that the system is so slow that clients get impatient. And, even near the end, for example, they'll book flights before their visa interviews, despite our advice not to do that. And so they attend their interview, and this is just practical matter. Once it's approved, you leave your passport at the embassy, and the embassy returns it to you in 5 to 10 business days. And so if you book the flight, you may not have your passport back in time, right, for the flight. So it's small things like that can create a lot of stress, which is why careful timing really matters.
Most visible consequence for mistakes in this field? Is it just time loss? Is it can you get the ban? Or can you really suffer long-term consequences from these mistakes beyond I don't know, paying extra for settling your taxes and figuring things out? What's the actual worst case scenario for paying for that lesson?
What we see with hiring is, of course, it's important to set everything up correctly. And if you're not set up, you can have penalties. So you need to make sure that you set up workers' compensation, that you're registered in the state. But I think most importantly, and that's different now compared to a few years ago, because a few years ago when we were talking to companies, they were all afraid about product liability and getting sued because someone was harmed by their product. But nowadays it has shifted more to employment liability. So in the hiring process, you really want to make sure that you do everything correctly, and that if for some reason it doesn't work out with an employee, that you are protected, and then that they cannot sue you for discrimination, for example, because unfortunately that happens sometimes in the US, that employees will try that. So I think that's very important. And that's also one of the main reasons why it's important to hire with your US entity and not with your foreign entity, but also to be very mindful about documenting everything and being compliant and making sure that you don't make any mistakes there.
On the US immigration side, if you don't honor the terms of your ESTA or visa, for ESTA, you can lose your ESTA. And also, it's not just getting you into the country on the appropriate visa, but you also have to extend your visa in time, right? To make sure that you are never out of status. And a very real consequence is, for example, if you overstay for less than a year when you leave, it triggers a 3-year ban. If you overstay for more than a year, it triggers a 10-year ban.
Wow.
Right? So those are real consequences. But even outside of overstaying, if you don't honor the terms of your particular visa, and many of these visas only enable the individual to work for the particular company that has petitioned for the visa. So for example, on E2, on L1, you can only work for the petitioning company. You cannot work for yourself, and you cannot work for any other company. So you really have to understand what the visa type will allow you to do, and definitely work pursuant to the terms of your visa. Otherwise, it can have real implications for your next visa application or green card application.
Quickly on that, that's actually, I missed it before. Is it a huge process? Like if we refresh visa multiple times for an individual or for a founder, but they're staying in the US constantly over the course of 5, 6, 7 years, then the green card is a natural thing that happens, or is it an extra effort, extra process that has to happen in parallel?
Oh, no. Unfortunately, it's not. It's not intuitive like that. US immigration, it's quite kind of a twofold process. There are non-immigrant visas, and then, of course, there are immigrant visas, for permanent stay. There are individuals who qualify for a green card and don't qualify for a work visa, and there are individuals who qualify for a work visa and don't qualify for a green card, which is what, yes, right, counterintuitive. And this is why getting U.S. immigration advice is so important, because often our role is to strategize both for the immediate temporary work visa, but also for the long-term green card. And so we would apply for the most appropriate one, and usually we do so in tandem if you qualify for both. But it's a long process. EB1 categories are not subject to PERM, which is a labor condition basically test for the employer has to show that there are no equally qualified U.S. citizens for the role. That is a very long process that applies to both green cards, EB2 and EB3. But for EB1 priority green cards, you don't have to go through that process. So that makes it quicker. And there are 3 categories. The first is for individuals of extraordinary ability. The second is for multi-level managers and executives. And the third is for professors and researchers. And so you'd have to meet the eligibility requirements for one of those categories in order to pursue one of those green card options.
And in no way choosing one particular path for visa application shuts the door to green card, or is it not related? Because that's the last bit of the counterintuitiveness that I didn't get.
No, I'm not trying to go through every single scenario, which is no, generally not. But they are separate things. You have to meet the eligibility requirements for the particular work visa, and then meet the eligibility requirements for the green card. Unlike UK immigration, where you enter on a work visa and then over a certain amount of time, you are eligible for permanent residency. It isn't a given in US immigration.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for the detailed explanation. Really, really great to understand that, actually. Super. So my last question to both of you today is, among, startups, early stage startups, scale-ups, or, well-oiled working organizations of hundreds and maybe thousands of employees, which one of these would benefit most of the conversation when they plan to enter US market, of course?
I think, both of them, but we definitely see that it's, of course, an expensive market. So I think if we look at our clients, at our early stage startups, it's very important to determine whether you have the budget available to actually be able to make it work in the US and to make it a success. But now more than ever, of course, there's a lot of insecurity when it comes to doing business in the US. So you have to prepare for that insecurity. So I think most of all, it's very important to prepare well and prepare for any changes or a lot of changes that may happen.
On the US immigration front, all of the above. And right now, with policy changes happening frequently, it's critical that companies get proper immigration advice to stay ahead of how changes might affect their workforce on visas. For example, there are various travel bans, right, that are applied in different ways and can affect whether an employee's visa extension will be processed or whether an immigrant visa, their green card, will be issued. So definitely have U.S. Immigration Counsel to track the policy changes and to alert you when one of your employees may be impacted.
Fantastic. Well, Khensani, Floor, thank you so much for today and for such a practical and honest perspective on the matter.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for having us. This was great.
Khensani, Floor, thank you for such a practical and honest perspective. As we can see, U.S. expansion is not just about entering a new market, but also aligning migration, hiring, payroll, and compliance decisions early before the pressure builds up. To everyone listening, if you are planning U.S. expansion, start earlier than you think and treat operational readiness as a leadership responsibility, not an afterthought. Thank you for listening and see you in the next episode.